Good morning, everybody. It is Martin, the sales strategist, coming to you live from Melbourne. Today, we have a very special guest on the show, beaming in from Pitch Industries in San Diego, the lovely metropolis of the United States. And his name's Daniel. We're going to hear from Daniel very, very soon. But before we do, Daniel Berger, I'm just going to introduce you, Daniel. So Daniel is the CRO, and I've never heard of a CRO before, so I'm going to ask you about that. So as the CRO of Pitch Industries and Intersection Capital, growing and operating it together with business partner Oren Klaff, the author of Pitch Anything and Flip the Script, these two tomes that if you're a customer of mine, you should have read and you should be able to quote verbatim. So with roughly 27 years of experience in sales and growing companies from small business to big enterprise with 20,000 employees. Wow, that's a lot of employees, Daniel. His current focus goes to preparing entrepreneurs and the growth rate of their businesses to enter public markets, turning great ideas into sound strategies and business models that can successfully be pitched to potential investors and clients, and has helped to create over $3 billion, that's B with a B, dollars in value of revenue for his clients. So we are in good company this morning. And just for a moment, just imagine how tough Daniel's job is. Having Oren Klaff as a business partner. I mean, to get a point across, he has to outframe and outmaneuver the guy that literally wrote the book. That's Daniel's day. Who would want that as a day? And imagine if Daniel gets his pitch wrong. I can imagine Oren's eyes rolling. Daniel, go stand in the corner. I'm going to be asking Daniel about that.
On one leg.
Exactly. And to my clients, I'm always saying, hey, look, you need to think like a premium product, like the BMW or the Mercedes-Benz of your industry. Well, as you'll hear in just a moment, Daniel is German, and literally he's the AMG Mercedes-Benz of the pitch, and he's all souped up and ready to go this morning. And we're going to take him out slow. We're going to take him out of the sheds nice and slow, put my foot gently on the accelerator. But as we get going, we're going to redline him. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Berger. Daniel, welcome. And it's great we could find time to have a chat today, my friend.
That's amazing. I mean, we've talked about that for a little while, right? So I think it's the first time on a show in Australia. So I think that's already pretty exciting that we get that done, like time zone wise.
Absolutely. And right. For all the listeners out there, Daniel has done us an extra special treat because it's actually Daniel's birthday today. And he's just shared with me, so happy birthday, Daniel. And he's just shared with me that he's on here for like 45 minutes. But if the questions aren't really interesting, he might stay on for a bit longer because he's got what'd you say it was? A rhubarb pie with sugar to get home to eat with your family once we're done here. So
100%. So and people always say there are no dumb questions, right? So I think that's completely not true. Like there are really a lot of dumb questions that people can ask. But I think if the questions are good, I can wait for the rhubarb pie like 15 minutes later, 15 minutes more, most probably. So let's see what we can answer. But I think you also had a couple of questions that you want to put up front.
So look, I guess from a curiosity perspective, Daniel, so how do you get to work with Oren Klaff? How did that happen? How did you go, hey, look, how did you guys come together, and how did that, what's your backstory, basically?
It's interesting. So I actually got in touch with Oren the first time because I hired him, right? So I was working for the company that you mentioned that has like 20,000 people on the payroll. And we just hired him to train our sales team, right? And we did that for a couple of years. And he was coming in with his family. I have 4 kids. One of my daughters is exactly the age of his son. and that's how things are working, right? But it kind of is what you mentioned, right? So he was he was doing a couple of things with people that he was a little bit frustrated around, right? And then I said, okay, so I think we could maybe do something at some point. We could do something together, and then I did some pricing, right?
Of course you did.
And like for the first like initially I was still doing my thing there, he was still doing his things, and we started just doing some business together. And at some point we just decided that we should do a little bit more together, and then we opened a business together, which is Agency 46. It's a business that we founded in San Diego together, which is basically like a revenue agency, where the idea is that instead of delivering leads to people, we're actually delivering revenue to people. We can talk about that a little bit, like why we actually thought that this is a good idea. But yeah, and then obviously I got also more and more involved into the investment part of his business, Intersection Capital. And now, like at this moment, I think we're bringing like 5 companies to the public markets that have been initially founder companies that have been founded by like people that are in the audience today. So I think that's also a very, very interesting.
You know, I think that's an interesting thing, because I think that a lot of people would think Pitch Industries, you are just sales training, but in fact, that's probably a smaller part of your business, because you're actually on the hustle all day, every day. So just give us a very short, maybe 90-second slab of what you do, as Oren calls it, when you're in the coal mines every day. So what is it that you actually do?
Yeah, so I mean, on the one side, we do the trainings, we do helping people with growing their companies, but we also realize that there are obviously some people that think that they need a good pitch, and then everything will be solved, right? But you're giving a bad company a good pitch, which makes matters worse, right? And then there are some companies that are really growing nicely, they have a good concept, and they gain some traction, and then we help them to raise maybe some initial capital. With some companies, we are raising basically capital to raise capital, right? But with what's happening right now in the public market, I'm not sure. I think in Australia it's pretty similar, but you're most probably also observing the movements that are going on on the US exchanges. So if you're looking at private equity, venture capital, all those different things, it's quite a grind to get money out of those guys. They're almost operating nowadays more like banks. So it's really just like spreadsheet. What are your revenues and so on. So with the public market, it's a little bit different, because people are looking at the company not that strongly analytical. They look at the narrative of the story, like what the trajectory might be. If the stock is worth like $3 today, can they imagine that it's worth $20 in a couple of years, or $6 in a year from now? And if yes, they will buy that share, right? And then you can imagine if you're taking a couple of guys that can really write business narratives and plug them into well positioned companies, that this can make some magic on the public markets, and that what we're doing right now. So we have companies that have been worth like $10 million a year ago, that went up to $600 million evaluation at the end of last year. Right. So, and that's all kind of what's obviously getting us excited. I mean, it's cool to sell some coaching, some training, but this is really where we want to get with the people. So the books and all those things is obviously top of the funnel. We're getting people interested. We're getting them excited about the whole topic of sales, the whole topic of also raising capital. But then from there, we are trying to really get those companies to a level of growth that they normally would never imagine is possible. And the sales part is still very, very important, right? Because also if you're going to the public markets, like what happens a lot is you get the money, you get this crazy market cap all of a sudden, and now you're like, holy smokes, now I have to deliver on those expectations.
Right.
Right. And then we basically come in again and we help with the revenue piece and make sure that the narrative needs to be adjusted, needs to go out there to really also ramp up sales. And that's obviously like it's a strong balance between really sales activities and capital raising activities, which in the end is still the same thing anyways.
Nice. So Daniel, let's get straight into some content for these wonderful people. So a lot of the people on the call are small to medium-sized business owners, and guys on the call, if you have questions, drop them in the chat at any time and we will answer them for you. So the first thing that I want to talk about, and my clients, and I know Jamie, who's on the call as well, and Michael, we talk to our customers about a lot, called pricing. So Daniel, why is pricing important in sales?
I believe it's maybe the number one most important thing in sales. Like, and we talk a lot about framing, frame control, status alignment, all those different things, but none of that number one works without pricing. And I think pricing is also the hardest thing to do psychologically for the person who's on the seller side.
So for people that are on the call that have never heard pricing before, what does it mean?
I mean, it really means that money is just a commodity. Okay.
Boom.
Right. And that kind of needs to really be inside of people's brains, right? Like if you're selling a product, like money is just a commodity. There's like if people think like just because they have the money that they could give to you would make them a great client, that's number one, not really true, right? There are lots of people that have a lot of money that you really don't want to have as a client, right? That's one thing. And on the other side, I think one of the most important things is that there's this huge element of fear in people that if they are very, very specialized on a certain relatively small group of people, that this is more risky than actually having everyone as a potential client.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is if you're kind of a company that can do stuff for everyone, you're also not really relevant for anyone. But in the moment you become a very, very specific expert, right? You become a scarce resource.
Mm-hmm.
And that in that moment you're becoming the price. And in that moment, like the price in terms of monetary price is becoming less and less important.
That's right. And this is great. So, and I can see there's a few clients on the call who are all in very competitive industries, and they're saying, "Hey, look, Daniel, this all sounds great, but we are on the hustings every single day, competing with a competitor that sells very, very similar, sometimes the same products as we do. So, how the hell is this relevant to me?"
Still, I mean, even if, like, first of all, obviously, if your product is really a commodity, there is almost always a level of complexity to really use that product in the best way possible in a certain business, right? And the problems are not all similar, right? I mean, if there's only one problem that you're solving and that's price, you obviously have a bit of a problem. Because then the only thing that you can do is drop the price, and then you are kind of in this spiral to the bottom. And in the end, there will just be a few people that will survive that. Normally, it ends up being a 2-horse race,
Mm-hmm.
like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, whatever. Like, there's almost any industry in the world you will find that it's ending up being a 2-horse race. But so in the end, what you also as a salesperson, I believe, need to figure out is what's your niche. Right, like in terms of problems that you can solve better than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be, I haven't really found an industry where you can't do that, right? Like if you're selling a software solution like a CRM, for example, I mean, they can do tons of different things for tons of different people, but people will perceive you as an expert if you understand their problem better than anyone that they have met before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not about you knowing the best solutions. It's about you understanding their problem on a deeper level, in a way that you also speak the language that they speak, and also to a kind of degree that they have never experienced before. In that moment, the product becomes secondary, and you become the price.
I love that, and it's basically exhibiting a deep understanding of their pain point or their problem, and communicating it in such a way that, hey, look, we've done this 1,000 times before. We know
I mean,
what the problem is.
There are two things to it, right? On the one side, there is attention. On the other side, there's the real problem. Okay, so if you're really good, you'd understand both. Like the one thing is what people think the problem is. The other thing is to really also know what the real problem is, because it's most of the time not the same thing. right? But only if
Totally.
you really understand a certain kind of group of people to a very, very deep degree, you will understand what their attention goes to, and you will also understand what their real problems are. And this is where you basically see, okay, this is where I can hit them on the attention point, status tip off, all kinds of things like that, flash rolls, and then you position yourself in a way that you have done that, like you have worked with companies like that like hundreds of times, and you can solve their problem better than anyone else. But also you can position yourself at some point and show, okay, everybody believes that this is the way to solve it, and you get them to the point that they actually start understanding what the real fundamental problem is. But just to give you an example, right? If you talk to someone who's like in my position, who's the chief revenue officer, right? So his main problem might be, okay, we need more sales, right? But then you could argue, if you're, for example, a consultant who sells strategy, you're like, yeah, I mean, those guys all think that they need more sales, but the real problem is that their strategy sucks. Sure. Okay, so now if you go to the CRO and try to sell him strategy, what do you think is going to happen? Not much, because he doesn't think that he needs a new strategy. He thinks he needs more sales. Sure. Okay, so that's what I mean with, okay, you need to know where their attention is versus where their real problem is. If you understand the people really, really well, you will understand where you have to get in, where their attention is, and then how to position yourself that you're the one who can really solve the problem for them. And I think that's kind of a big art to do, because it should also not be like a bait and switch, right? That so you're offering sales and then you're doing something else.
We've got a couple of questions here which we'll talk to. So the first one we'll come to is Jamie Adamchuk. And it's a long question. Jamie. I'll put it up as well. So I have a question about avoiding supplication when it comes to making an offer and then having the client come back and ask for additional work to be done prior to payment for work already completed. How would you frame a great response that establishes you as the prize, enables you to stand your ground while creating enough intrigue for the prospect to want to pay and then continue to the next steps? Context: the sale of a business where the client is unsatisfied with the results of a business evaluation.
Okay, so I will need to unpack that question. Okay, is it like, are we getting pretty instant responses? Is it really like what he means is kind of scope creep?
Just whack that in the chat thing there, Jamie.
So that they basically tried to creep in some additional scope that was not part of the contract?
It sounds like it, yeah. So go with that. It sounds like that's one, and that's an issue that businesses face. So yeah, how would you address that one?
Okay, so one of the simple things that we would do a lot in similar work as the one that you seem to describe is, if you feel that it's not appropriate to kind of write a big invoice on this additional kind of piece because you feel like, okay, you somehow need to make sure that the client is extremely happy for whatever reason, and you don't want to kind of get into a conflict, you write an order of some additional work, and you just put a discount of 100%. Okay, so that's one way of doing it, right? That you create a change order. That's just like a technical thing of solving it, right? But that you show this is work that's getting done, right? And you write a change order, or you write an additional order that people still need to sign off on, even if it's zeroed out as a price. Okay, but this allows you that once those guys are coming back and try to do that as an ongoing thing, most probably will stop them from doing it, because they say, okay, this is actually an order that they discounted for whatever reason. That's obviously one thing. So this way they don't perceive it as, yeah, they can just ask for it and it was scoped in. You still say, okay, this was not scoped in. This is additional scope, right? As a courtesy, I will zero it out, but I need you to accept that order so that they realize, okay, this is something that is additional work, right? On the other side, if you don't want to do that work and you just say like, okay, I want to get out of that kind of request as something that you want to do as a free kind of courtesy or whatever it is, then obviously it depends a little bit on the relationship that you have with those people and how precise your scoping, like the scope of work has been defined ahead of time. But okay, Jamie is answering.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the crucial thing, right? That you identify that this is out of the scope, right? And then if you invoice it, maybe with a discount, or if you completely invoice it, but never do something for free that is additional scope.
Amen.
Without at least writing the change order, right? Like, and then maybe you can also just write the change order and put a little price on it with a big discount, whatever it is, just to educate them, right? To condition them that this is not the normal way that you want to have people behaving. The other thing, sorry, that you can always use is kind of like pre-framing the people that you don't like and like to work with when you sign people up. Okay, where you basically also use that as a pricing element. You say like, like in the process of getting somebody on board, is that you explain your service, you do all those different things, and then at the end you basically say like, but as much as you're evaluating us, we're also evaluating you, right? So there are a couple of things that would really make you a client that I don't want to work with. Right, and then you take some of those examples. Say like, I mean, there are some of those clients where everything is great on the front end, and they always try to creep in additional scope and accept us to do it. Right, if that's the way that you operate, I think I would rather, like, I don't know if we're busy. I don't know if we are lucky or we are smart, but we're extremely busy, right? And we just want to have work with people that we have a good relationship with and that respect each other's value and work.
Totally.
Right. So those are other things that you can use as a kind of pricing element in a way, but it needs to come up front. The problem is if you're trying to say that after they did this, it's not going to work. But if you're doing it before, then you close that door.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to happen up the front. It's a bit like a lot of different things, pricing up the front. We've got one more question on pricing, and then we'll move on to another topic. This one comes from Ben Bridges. Question: personal branding versus company branding. How do you price the company versus an individual when you're scaling a business, as in the founder and director wanting to step away from key roles, so to speak?
Okay, so I mean, I think there are different levels of certainty in a company, right? So there are basically two pieces of certainty that are more related to the person, and then there's one that is more related to the company, right? And the one that is related to the company is credibility. And that is something that you can relatively easy build through stories and through also all those logos and case studies and all those different things. That's a credibility piece. Right? And the other two levels of certainty are trust and expertise or authority, which is also kind of status. And that can be held by each person in your company if they know how to build it. Right? That's not really, that should not even be tied to the owner of the company. The problem is most of the time really the owner of the company more than anyone else, right? Because the paradigm that let you grow that business is normally that you're the guy who can basically fix everything and do everything and the biggest expert in the company, and your own people will treat you as the biggest expert in the company, and your ego is actually pretty, like, it really loves it to always be the guys who's solving the biggest problem for the team, right? So that way you're also getting your own people kind of in a spot where they should be dealing with it themselves and build their own kind of status, but it's pretty comfy to always bring in Ben right, whenever things get a little bit hard. But quickly to talk about how can you teach your team to build authority. It's like what we normally really are doing a lot with people are flash roles, right? So flash roles are basically little riffs, like it's like a guitar riff or a drum solo or whatever it is. So if we're looking at pitching situations, you basically have a vertical. I show like horizontal and say vertical, right? That so you have a horizontal axis, which is basically moving forward in your pitch, right? That's the narrative. That's what you're like moving forward in your let's say in your process and whatever it is. It just doesn't need to be the pitch, but in general, your sales process, there's kind of a horizontal axis, which is on the timeline, you're moving forward and you're moving from one thing to the next thing. Okay, and then there's like a vertical axis, right, which is the depth of knowledge that you have, and the depth of expertise that you can show. And people that are really, really great in pitching have this ability that they can drill deep within a minute, pop out and move forward again. Okay, and how you do that is are those flash rolls, right? While flash rolls are normally like things where you use like very, very specific lingo, you drill pretty deep, pretty fast, and those are not done for comprehension. You don't even want people to understand what you're saying, therefore status building. So if you, for example, have things like the big idea and features and benefits and whatever, like how much you would ever explain them, those are things that you want people to comprehend. If you're doing a flash roll, you just want people to understand, okay, I don't need to ask a question to that guy again. He's like the biggest expert that I ever talked to. So just as an example, they are normally presented in a very unemotional way. Okay, so let's say, for example, you would go to the doctor and say, like, your problem is that you have a rash on your arm. Or you go to the doctor and you ask him, okay, so I have this rash on my arm, right? So the flash roll is basically you identify a problem, right? You take a perspective on it and you provide a solution, right? That's what the doctor does all day long, right? He says, oh, okay, that's that type of rash, right? It's April, late April. We have like 8 of those guys coming in every day right now. Okay, so you're identifying that problem. You say, like, it's a rash. It's like stamping out beer cans for me. I see that every day, right? Then you take a perspective and say, like, yeah, I mean, people always think it's whatever, right? But the reality is this is a very, very simple problem, right? And then you just use some kind of acronyms and Latin words that nobody understands, but everyone will know, okay, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about, right? That's what the doctor is, very unemotional, right? Like, yeah, I mean, what it really is like whatever itis and with blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, so I don't understand him, but I see that he knows exactly what it is. Right? And then he provides a solution. He says, okay, we'll give you that kind of, I will give you this prescription for those 2 things. You take one in the evening, one in the morning, right? If it's not gone within 48 hours, give me a call. But in 99% of the cases, that's fixing it, right? And that's very, very without lots of emotion, right? If you're taking that into business, you would just, for example, give a certain example of a problem that has been solved. That could also be a historical thing. And somebody said, like, yeah, so how would you do this? Like, yeah, I mean, we've been working with that company. And the problem was, like, I don't know, like, though you take some acronyms of, okay, this is what needed to be solved. That guy might not even understand any word of it, but it also doesn't matter. He's just not going to embarrass himself asking more question about it.
Absolutely.
Right. So those flash rolls are very, very crucial to build that authority in your people, because you can script them. And normally it kind of avoids this constant kind of fetch me a red stone additional questions that are just analyst frames that
Which drives businesses nuts, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect. Hey, we've got a few questions coming up. We are going to, we'll come to that one, Jamie and Chris, towards the end. So thanks for that one. And I think we'll come to that one. A couple of questions I want to ask you. So in Australia right now, we're very fortunate. So where the economy is pretty damn good, and a lot of businesses that I'm working with are scaling and scaling their sales teams. So 2 questions. The first parter is, a lot of businesses at the moment that I'm working with are inundated with leads. They're inundated with inquiries. So I'm working with them to master the short, sharp, are you a good fit for us, and swipe left or right, without taking up too much time. Because if you're getting that many inquiries, how do you deal with them all? So I'm just curious, from your perspective, if you're a business that had 70 or 80 phone calls coming in a day, how would you quickly, with status and going through the process, swipe left or right on a customer? How would you do it, Daniel?
So, I mean, we're using this thing that we call the 6-minute pitch, right? Where, I mean, it also obviously depends a little bit on the business and where they're coming from and what the main thing is. But there are 2 things that I believe are going wrong pretty often. First of all, people pick up the phone or whatever, like get it in touch, do a Zoom call or whatever it is, have this initial conversation with a potential client. And in your scenario that you're describing, is this normally the case that they kind of get into a conversation with those leads after they opted in?
Yes.
Right. So like the worst thing that can happen is that you pick up the phone and you start asking them clipboard questions. Okay, so if I say clipboard, it's like, yeah, you have this clipboard, and then you're kind of going through your questions. But because what you're doing in your business, and then in the end, you're starting a relationship with that potential client, right? And relationships in the end, they don't really work so much different from normal human relationships. The more human you can be in that relationship, the more the more universal it becomes. Okay, so just imagine like if they just feel that you're checking them off with some kind of qualification questions, right? That's something that will work for you in a sense. The problem that very often happens is, okay, you get sorted through those, right? You say like, okay, I have 3 buckets, maybe, right? So you maybe create 3 buckets and say like, here are the ones that are interested, I will follow up on. Here are the ones that are not interested, that I don't have to follow up on. And then I have a bucket with some undecided ones that I have to decide if I want to follow up on them, right? And we just sort them into those buckets. The problem is, this is not really a pleasant experience for the people that are going through that process very often, because you have those clipboard questions that are pretty impersonal. And then, so just imagine you would be, it would be around courtship. In a normal relationship, you want to date someone, right? And then you're like, yeah, okay, you know what? I have some good income, right? I'm a good guy, right? And as long as the woman is fine, right? So I just have like some criteria here, right? And then you take out your clipboard and you talk to people to women at bars and say like, yeah, you know what? There are just a few things that I want to know, right? Do you have debt? Right? Do you want to have kids?
Is this the German way, Daniel? Is this German efficiency on show here?
That doesn't even work in Germany. But you get the point, right? You would never do that in the normal world, but that's what we tend to do in sales, right? So on the other side, you also don't want to go in and brag, right? I mean, that's the other extreme. So you go in and like, yeah, look at me, right? My car, my yacht, whatever, all those different things, right? And you show like what a great guy you are, and that's like that lets you in the end look weak, right? Because somebody who is bragging and is just talking about himself actually is a low status person, right? So now you're left with that problem that you don't want to go in, like, because if you're really looking, like when you're trying to impress people, you're dependent on their validation. That is low status.
Correct.
Okay, so some people don't understand. Okay, well, how can you sell and not try to impress people? Okay, so the big art is that people are impressed with you without you trying to impress them. Okay, that's basically what you're trying to do in this first talks, right? That people feel like, okay, this is someone who I should not ignore without consequences. This guy can really have some positive impact on my life, right? You're not trying to impress someone in terms of validation seeking, but you're also not impersonal, but just doing like clipboard kind of questions. Okay, so now I told you tons of things that you shouldn't do, and nobody knows what to do instead. But should I talk about that as well?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I say to people from a status perspective, don't tell them how good you are. Show them how good you are in a story, which is what we do with Oren and yourself and on a weekly basis. Don't tell them, show them. There's a big difference, because telling comes off as big noting. Showing comes off as it's like your thing. I've helped raise over $3 billion in sales over the journey. It's no big deal. It's just what I do, right? That's part of your, it's not big noting. It's just a fact.
Yeah, and also like in general, like if you go to a party and somebody is bragging, like how much do you like that person? Right, but pitching very often works that way, right? And people still don't like you much more than in the bar if you do that. right? But if you tell interesting stories, like people are getting intrigued, right? And it should always come with a certain level of humility, right? But also, what's more important is basically that you turn this whole thing relatively fast around. First of all, okay, you talk about change, right? You talk about because change, if you're looking at the croc brain, is what's movement if you're coming out of the cave.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you're coming out of the cave, you're scanning the environment for change.
Totally.
Not change, but movement, which is in business terms, that change, right? If something is moving, you're paying attention to it. If it's a rock, it can't attack you, right? So first of all, it's change because that's a threat in a sense, but you can then come and say like, okay, that threat also has some opportunity in it. You can turn it into something that is kind of pushing greed buttons, whatever it is, right? But if you can go in and say like, yeah, there's so much going on right now. I'm not sure if we're lucky or smart, but the market is going bonkers right now. I don't know if you're aware of those changes, right? But because of that, like, there's so much going on. So we are in the position right now that we have to really be very, very careful who we take on as clients. Right?
That everyone listening, that small 30 seconds with the content from Daniel, that's worth the price of admission today, which, by the way, didn't cost you anything. But still, if you could put that frame into your pitch or the way you go about selling, that's really powerful there, Daniel.
Yeah, and it's also not braggy. It's not like that you're trying to kind of be like bossy or trying to be like a super, like, it. People receive it relatively well, right? If you have a good story why this change is happening, they're like, yeah, I totally get it, right? And then by also saying like, I'm not sure if we are lucky or smart, but somehow we have tons of business right now, it also doesn't sound braggy,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like I don't even know if we are just lucky, right? I always used to say like, what we're doing is so confidential that I don't even know what I'm doing. But so, but that's that kind of sense of humor is always good, that you try to use a little bit of humor, because first of all, people that are using humor are normally very confident and they're not scared. They're not in fear. Normally, kind of when you're calling up, like when you're taking up the phone, for some reason, even if you're full of leads, but people don't want to mess it up. There's a certain level of fear, right? And then also this pricing thing, like of course you want to qualify them, but you also don't want to lose a good lead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that whole kind of thing that is going on in your head is already pretty disadvantageous, right? Because
Absolutely.
it makes you the supplicant, right? So if you're taking, like, first of all, I think the priming that you do for yourself is very crucial, right? And there are kind of 5 things, and I think that's something I would quickly go over those 5 things if you allow. Right? If you put them kind of on a little
it's your birthday, Daniel.
Yeah, it's my birthday, so I would just do it, right? So the first is clarity of
just before you get into this, though, I think this is there's been a couple of questions popping up, and this will answer some of these questions. So, if possible and time permitting, can you share with us framing for beginners, model or process, which I think is where we're about to go. Second one from Jenna, that's a slightly different one. So I just wanted to pre-frame that this will be answering some of the questions that have been listed in the chat box. So sorry for interrupting, Daniel. Go for your life.
And we will cover those anyways, right? But so right now, this priming kind of exercise is more for your kind of inner game in a sense. Okay, so what needs to go on in your head before you pick up the phone, right? And like one of the most important things is that starts with this clarity of intent. Okay, so just looking at other areas, like I talked about going out, trying to talk to someone that you might be interested, building a relationship with, whatever. So the second piece, and I will combine those things because combined they kind of make more sense. The second is freedom from outcome, right? So if you have a clear intent that is not related to an outcome, it makes it very, very easy to talk to people. Okay, so just give you an example. Okay, let's say you see as a woman, you see a guy, as a guy you see a woman, or if you're interested in guys as a guy, I don't care, whatever. But you find someone that you find attractive, right? So now you go there. If you go there and you have an outcome in mind that you say like, okay, I don't want to go home alone tonight. I want to talk to that person. That's the outcome that I have in mind. The energy will be completely different from you going there and saying, I want to get to know that person better and I want to have a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does it make sense?
Totally.
If that's a truthful kind of idea that you have in mind, that you just want to get this person to know, right? This is very, very crucial, right? Because you will have a great conversation, and everything that might be outcome related will come together anyways, right? If you get to know each other a little bit better, like each other, all those different things. So the intent is not outcome related. Okay, so clarity of intent, freedom from outcome, right? Then the third thing is entitlement, which also means that you own your space, but you also kind of own maybe the environment in a sense that you're in. Like what I'm like, and that's kind of like an alpha thing, right? The alpha has an identity as a group, not just for himself, like a real alpha. I'm not talking about those betas that try to be alphas, right? But a real alpha is always taking care of the group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so also, like, if you would have like a real kind of alpha type of guy goes into a club, like he will never join someone else's party. Like, he comes in with his own party, even if he's just by himself, right? But you can kind of join that energy. So that's kind of a level of entitlement, that you own a certain space. And in business, this ownership of a certain space could be your expertise, right? It could be a certain piece of knowledge. Like, they will also call it like local star power. Like, if you, for example, on a global sense, if you take a golf pro that is really good and compare him with a brain surgeon or the UN secretary or whatever, right? On a global sense, the golf pro is much lower status, but just go to the golf course. Who's now higher status? Who's running the show?
Yeah, love it.
Right. So there's a certain space that you just have to own, right? So that's kind of that level of entitlement, right? Then the fourth piece is congruence and authenticity. Okay, so it just needs to be. You just have to stay yourself. You can't really play someone else, but also, like, what I also want to mention is you don't have to just have one identity. Okay, you can carry like different hats, but it needs to be you. And all of you guys are doing that already. You're just not aware of it. Okay, because you can't really tell me that that Martin, when he goes home and talks with his kids and his wife, is the same guy as he is right now on the call, right? When you're talking to clients on a sales call, you're also not the same guy. You are the same Martin, right? But you wear different hats, you play different roles. You're already doing that, right? So just be yourself in that role without playing someone else. But it needs to be congruent. And one of those very, very crucial things is also in that space, you have to know your values. You have to know your boundaries, right? So those boundaries are very, very important, because like everybody will respect you a lot if you're actually following through. If those boundaries will be seen as congruent. You say that these are my boundaries, and those boundaries are also really in place if it comes to money, right? And you're like, okay, this is not going to happen, right? I told you before. Like, and then the fifth is self-amusement. Extremely important, right? And
but
because
not that type of self-amusement, right, Daniel? The other type of self-amusement.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, not that one. But self-amusement, what it really means is that you have fun doing what you're doing, and you're kind of amusing yourself in the process without being kind of dependent on someone else also finding it amusing or funny. Because it's a huge difference of trying to be funny and just enjoying yourself. Right? Because if you're trying to be funny, you're again validation seeking. You're dependent on someone like, if you're making jokes, for example, right, and they're not funny, right? As long as you're really finding them funny, it's actually good enough. It will be infectious. But if you're telling a joke and you're just telling it for the purpose of the other people laughing, and you don't even think it's funny, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right. So, but in general, like, if you just have like this level of like this whole kind of energy of self-amusement makes you so unneedy, it's incredible. Like, if you just like because you can't really be fearful and enjoying yourself at the same time.
No, you can't be. And it's the one thing that I say to all my customers. Number one, have fun. If you go into any sales interaction and your primary purpose is to have fun, then, as you say, you can't be fearful and have fun at the same time. And the second thing is be yourself. I can't pitch or sell like you. You can't pitch or sell like me. Jamie, who's on the call, or Shanika or Ben, you have to pitch as you would pitch. You can't try and be somebody else, because that comes across as you said, incongruent, and that then comes across as needy. A very quick example for me was during the 2008 GFC, when sales went from $750,000 a month to $75,000 a month. I literally had to sell something, so I turned off I'm a natural smartass. I know you're surprised about that, Daniel, but I'm a natural smartass, right? And I turned that off because I thought I would offend people. And the minute I did that, I started to get nervous in a pitch for the first time, dry in the mouth, you know, and it came out all wonky until I figured out, went back to the books, figured out what I was doing wrong. Then I turned it back on again and sales started again. It's because I wasn't being me. Authentic.
Yeah, 100%. And also, like, a super important thing here are boundaries, right? So if you just quickly go through the exercise and think about who's actually the client that he would fire tomorrow. Okay, so that's most probably where your kind of value where your values are, right? Because the clients that you would fire tomorrow, they're violating your values.
Totally.
Okay, so now you can basically use that to create your boundaries, right? That you say, like, okay, I'm not sure if we are, as I said before, I'm not sure if we are lucky or smart, but we're extremely busy, right? So if we were looking at choosing the clients, obviously it would be good if you could pay your bills if you're hiring us, right? But most important than that, right? Much more important than that, that's kind of given, is I just needed to fire a client, right? And the client, I needed to fire him because of this or that behavior, right? So if I see any of that behavior within the next 20 minutes, I'm going to be out even before that.
Firm boundaries is absolutely essential for all business owners, and it's important in sales, and you can set the boundary right to start with. Now, Daniel, we're at 45 minutes and you've got a rhubarb cake, but we're going to keep you on here for a bit longer because I'm only 2 questions into my 15 question. we might have to come back another day, but
we can do that.
Get into a couple of questions. A number of my clients at the moment, as I said before, are in the process of scaling their sales teams. You've worked with sales teams of up to 20,000. So give me a couple of tips, or give our viewers a couple of tips on when you're interviewing sales talent, when you're trying to onboard sales talent. What are a few tips and tricks that you've learned over there? A few questions to ask, a few things to put salespeople through to figure out if they're going to be a good fit or not, Daniel?
Yeah. So one big thought around hiring in general is that I feel people are doing it at the wrong moment too often, and because of that, with not enough calm and not enough time and effort. Boom. Okay, so what is kind of very, very interesting is that lots of companies, if they would select, for example, the CRM, or they would select technology for, I don't know, like your need video setup and all those different things, people would spend more time on selecting the CRM for $1,000 a month than they would actually spend choosing the next employee. Okay, so that's one thing that is really puzzling to me, right? Because that employee can cost you your company if it's a wrong hire, depending on the area of the world where you are and the size of the company, right? But if you are really a small business and you hire on a certain level wrongly, that can cost you a fortune.
Totally.
Right, not just in lost sales, but also in lost energy. Like if you really could look at the chain reaction of a cultural misfit in a company, it's going to be very, very costly.
Well, bad culture will affect your business within 2 weeks. So
and then, like, one thing that I always say, like, most of the tools that you will find for hiring are made for big corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they're not really working for smaller companies. For several reasons, right? First of all, like, you might have like the scoring system in a big corporation. They will tell you, okay, like how to hire like A players or whatever it is, and they have some scoring system, whatever, right? And then they score high, but somehow you realize, okay, culturally that's going to be difficult, right? In that big corporation, you will hire them anyways because they're scored high, right? So in general, if you're, for example, looking at how, and I think that's pretty true also for sales teams. If you're looking at how they would select people for those special units at like Navy SEALs or whatever, like Team 6 or what's the name, like the super special unit, right? And you would say, let's say you would have like, let me quickly do this if this works here. You can see this?
Yep.
Right, and let's say you have this, you would have like 2 dimensions, like this. Up, let me move this up a little bit. Right, and this here would be performance.
Yep.
Right, and this here would be trust.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might, because everybody likes those 4 corners, those 4 squares, right? And then you would say, like, everybody obviously wants to have this guy.
Yep.
Right, super high performance, super high trust.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and nobody wants to have this guy. Super low performance, super low trust.
Correct.
Right, but we also agree that this guy is pretty hard to find.
Scarce as rocking horse shit. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so then obviously, like, some people would say they would rather have this guy than this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so what is your thought on that?
I would take trust over performance any day, me personally.
Okay, so and let's also define trust, right? So for me, trust is not that this person will kind of do the job. For me, trust is if I die, I will give you my kids and my money.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like really like trust, right? Where you say like, okay, this is like someone that you feel like super comfortable, and you can really trust that person on a high level, right? On those Navy SEALs, they say like, this guy is no chance, right? They would every day they would hire this guy or that guy or that guy or whatever. Most probably they would not necessarily want that guy because you still need performance, right? But this guy here is definitely the higher compared to this one.
Yeah, right. Because in that environment of Navy SEALs, you need to be able to trust your mate, because if not,
you
you could
like,
die.
do you know how you can find this guy in any company?
How's that?
Yeah, you just go in and ask everyone else who's the asshole. and then if this guy is getting rewarded all day long, the rest of the team will start working as they should. So I hope this was a little bit of insightful of how you want to select people. It's not all about performance in the short run. It's about fit and trust and cultural fit and those things much more. And I think, but if you're coming to that, like you need to also start trusting. You have to build a reference story of who you want to, like, who are the guys that you work with, and you have to trust, and you have to trust your gut a little bit more than most people would do. And I think that's not maybe the popular kind of narrative, but the reality is, for example, if you've ever had an experience where you said, okay, this was kind of the energy, this was kind of the vibe that I had at that kind of moment in time, where you say like, this was legendary how we worked as a team. Right, and I think everybody had that experiences, right? And they say like, okay, this was legendary. Like, if I could just build a team like that, that would be awesome. Find that story, and if you interview someone and you can't picture that guy as part of that team that you just kind of remember, your subconscious mind is telling you something that you most probably should listen to.
Brilliant. So, Daniel, we've got about 8 minutes left, and I'm not going to get in Mrs. Berger's way when she comes and drags you out of there to get the rhubarb pie.
They're already circling around my office. Like, my little 4-year-old was already knocking on the door. Like, hey, Dad, what's going on?
So we've got a question from Jenna. Jenna, I'm looking at starting up a new business, and I'm not sure how to demonstrate my expertise without much of a following. How would I pitch myself as a startup to drive customers?
Okay, so what is missing really? Like, is it track record as a company, or is it track record for you as a person in that space because it's a new space? Like, so, maybe you can quickly respond to that.
Have you got the answer for that one, Jenna?
Most of it is always like there's a little delay. So let's see, and we can get back to that one if you have. Okay, as a company. Okay, so so there are obviously a couple of ways to get around it. We're working a lot with startups, right? And they're always like, yeah, I can't really tell that this is like stamping out beer cans for us, because we haven't stamped out any beer cans yet. We're actually just starting that. we're actually just starting that out. Okay, so first of all, there's lots of space right now where nobody else has stamped out those beer cans because those markets are trash, right? Like if you go into NFTs or whatever, right? Like it's a big boom, but nobody knows how it works, right? So nobody else will have the credibility, right? So if that's kind of the case, I think one of the credibilities that you would want to build is that you've been in environments where you have explored new technology already several times, and you got it to work. So your expertise is, for example, to make new technology kind of market ready or whatever it is, right? That you say like exploring new ways and kind of making them work is what I did for the last 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is. And I kind of specialized on that. And then it's also building a sense of credibility around the whole topic of basically being the person who can create a new business, right? So there's obviously, it's hard when there's no track record to build around the track record of the company, right? But the next thing that you want to do is show that you understand the problem at a much deeper level than most others, and that's the crucial thing. So you always have to look at the problem as something that looks like a prism, like a diamond prism, right? And that prism, you could basically look at it from 50 different angles, 50 different ways, whatever, right? And if you can do that, like people will identify you as an expert without question, right? People don't identify you as an expert because you are able to provide a good kind of pitch about the solution. They identify you as an expert because you can describe their problem better than anyone else.
Totally. And
right. So I hope that's helpful for you.
I think the thing is that with every person I work with, and I'm sure you as well, they've all got a prize frame in them. They've all got a uniqueness. They've all got a status frame. They've all got a certainty frame in them. It's just a matter of getting it through them. You're welcome, Jenna. So Daniel, we're nearly done. I'm not going to thank you for your time because that's low status. So, and that's I say to my customers, no, thank you, no, please. So that takes a bit of getting used to, right?
But here's also an interesting thing about that. I just wanted to mention it, right? Those status things, like they have to be gone at some point, right? So with the relationship that we have established, right, you can thank me for my time, and I can also say like, great to be on the show. The initial conversations are something completely different. Right then, I just want to mention, because sometimes there are misconceptions. You don't have to play that status game forever with people. Like there will be, like, if it's alpha tests, you want to kind of do those. You want to kind of sometimes win, sometimes lose those alpha tests on purpose or whatever it is. But if the relationship is established, right, you don't have to do this like, if you're late on the call, then you're bailing out. Like if you have a good established relationship, someone comes late on the call, you don't have to leverage all the time to build your status or give a knack to the person doing that, because at some point you just have to really work together like you're doing with the other business partners. Because sometimes there's this confusion around, right? So in the beginning, it's pretty important to create those boundaries. Once you know that those boundaries are generally accepted, but just life is as it is, right? Sometimes right, you can act like a normal human being.
Totally. Awesome. And I guess it's a good time to announce now that the Sales Strategist and Pitch Incorporated in the United States, we've just yesterday finalized a bit of an agreement that Sales Strategist customers are going to be working as well, or have the opportunity to work as well with yourself and with Oren on a weekly basis, as well as myself. So they'll have the terrible threesome in their corner. So we'll have more to say about that over the next few weeks or month, but this is going to be exciting for anyone on the call. You've now got 3 people, and Oren, Daniel, and myself, that really understand pitching, persuading, influencing, and sell on your corner, in your team. Right, Daniel?
That's 100% true. No, it's going to be exciting. I'm excited about that. I think that's going to be great.
It will be great. So, look, we're done. That's an hour. Your 4-year-old son can now come and drag you out of there to have your rhubarb pie. Happy birthday, Daniel, from everyone on the Sales Strategist call.
No, 100%. Thank you, guys.
And
And I
as
think
I
I
say,
didn't
carry on.
just wanted to mention I didn't see a stupid question, so I will come back.
That's because we're Australians and we don't do stupid questions, and we only ask the really pointed questions. So from my sales heart to yours, Daniel, thanks for your time and chat soon, brother.
Okay, we'll chat soon. Thanks.
Cheers, mate.
That was great.